Hi everybody and welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. Today I am joined by the one and only amazing Gemma Hanley. She is a mindset coach and she's truly amazing. I met Gemma, we used to work at the same clinic together about 3 years ago, and I've referred a lot of my patients over to her who really need some structure and help around helping deal with their mindset and how to implement practical changes and work beyond maybe some self-limiting beliefs that they have about their journey and their road back to wellness. So let me formally introduce Gemma with her bio here. So after achieving her own recovery from 23 years of extreme anxiety, depression, and chronic fatigue, which I'll get Gemma to go into a little bit more for you, every cell within Gemma's body now finds joy in showing others that they can create a life, happiness, and self-connection as well, which is so important. Gemma's dedicated to providing her audience with the obscure truths that are essential for creating meaningful and lasting change in life, and you can be sure to learn an analogy or two along the way. Gemma's coaching philosophy is founded in discovering the root to the pain and suffering in an individual's life, which then allows for the deepest issues to be worked on. As part of this approach, Gemma engages and challenges a neurological pattern by offering direct questions that prompt new learnings. Never short of practical tools, Gemma's sessions will leave you feeling empowered and moving forward towards where you want to go in life, which I think is a great summary of what Gemma does do. So what I love about Gemma is, and I said this in when Gemma and I were talking just the other night, Gemma's one of those people that there's very few people that I know that find what it is that they need to do to get well, and then they make that their life mission. So everything that they do, down to how they eat, how they move, how they exercise, how they think, breathe, sleep, the lot, is based off a foundation of what Gemma knows. And tell me if I'm wrong here, Gemma, this is how I perceive it from you when I talk to you, of what you know to be your truth in what you need to do to have joy, happiness, and health in your life. So maybe for everybody out there listening that may have kidney disease or associated conditions, maybe talk us through, number one, a bit about your journey with the chronic fatigue, because I know it's great for people to feel a connection to you. And then let's go from there and maybe walk us through how you got to that and what you do now practically day to day to be able to embody what you do now, which is health and vibrancy and amazingness.
For sure. Gosh, there's a lot in there. I'll be asking for your prompts along the way. It's always interesting when you hear someone's observations of you. And yeah, like I can see how from the outside that's how it would look. And I would explain it quite similarly too, in that now that I've practiced so long connecting to self, it's just my truth. Like I just live it. It's not, it doesn't feel like choices. It doesn't feel like anything I work at. It's just my way of being. But that certainly was so far from the case not so long ago, 7 or 8 years ago now, I found myself in a huge health crisis, like at the peak of debilitating anxiety. Like I was having panic attacks, blacking out from those. It was infiltrating every area of my life, my work, my relationships, my money, my ability to feel joy and just play. Yeah. I would struggle to even leave the house if it was for anything that wasn't like, I'll be in strife, or like it will be significantly noticed if I don't show up here, which essentially was work, right? Yeah. I didn't feel like I could even socialize, and depression was huge as well. I was having suicidal thoughts and desires, and I just couldn't connect to that purpose for being here. Like what's the purpose for my existence if this is as good as it gets? That's probably the most succinct way I could explain it, because I could acknowledge and see that there was more, and I could see other people achieving that, and I was trying really hard myself, but I wasn't getting the wins on the board. So that felt really disheartening. And the chronic fatigue was really the culmination of all of that. I mean, anxiety and depression are obviously have the physical components as well. But all of that sort of rolled along for so long. And I mean, I can't remember being well ever really before the last few years. And that culminated into like serious gut health issues, which I just did not know if I was ever going to be able to live without. And then the chronic fatigue where, you know, I couldn't work for 3 years. I was extremely housebound. I needed carers. When I began to be able to leave the house, I needed a wheelchair, and like a good day, I could sit in that for half an hour, maybe an hour, before it would become too much. I can remember even I was living with my dad in China for part of that. And in China, where I was living, a lot of the paths, like they're quite bumpy. They're like still paved, but they've got, yeah, bumps along the way. And even that in itself, in me being pushed along that, was so stimulating for my nervous system that I was completely wiped and back to bed for like a few days. So you know, I can certainly say I reached this stage of my life where I could no longer ignore the fact my body was like screaming at me, and I couldn't keep ignoring it. I'd been a real A+ professional at ignoring it up until then. But I couldn't anymore. I'd looked for every quick fix. I'd looked for the magic pills. I just wanted this like health problem out of the way so that I could begin like getting back to my dream life and being successful and ticking the boxes. And, you know, what I had to come to realize was that I was so incongruent with those words, like what I thought the dream life was or what success was. I'd templated that so heavily based on people, places, things, events outside of myself that it wasn't mine. And what I came to realize, you know, and I worked with a number of different practitioners, which I'll get to in a moment, but this health journey was there because of how I'd been living my life. And I went and saw more than 18 different specialists and health practitioners with expertise in different areas, and I just couldn't get the answers. There might have been short-term traction and that spark of hope or belief, but it wasn't transforming my life. I wasn't seeing change, and I had to realize two big things. One was that I had to self-educate. I had to become my own advocate. I had to decide, even though information was being offered toward me, does that seem right? Like, does that feel true for me? Because at the end of the day, like, you're the only one connected to your body. I'm the only one connected to mine. And I think that that is too quickly dismissed. And I think that we hand over our power too quickly to the suggestions, the judgments, the opinions of other people. And the biggest piece that came in accompaniment with this was it became very obvious to me very quickly that so many people, and myself up until this point, were willing to see that prolonged experiences of dis-ease or dysfunction or disharmony were normal. And the actual truth is that, yes, they're common. Yeah, like we can look out into the world and see them everywhere. And if we're having that experience ourselves, we're like in that every single day. So it's very easy to affirm to ourselves that that's normal. Yeah. But what I would suggest is that it's common, in that we see a lot of it, we're exposed to a lot of it, and then it begins to fade, that line between like commons over here and normals over here, and we can actually define what our own normal is. So, you know, when I was having these suggestions sent my way of like, well, maybe this is as good as it gets for you, or, you know, you might just have to learn to live your life this way. That's when I had to really get clear on, okay, you know, how much of this is a common way of being versus how much am I desiring and willing to cultivate as my own definition of normal, because they're very different things. And what I learned and what I suggest is that feeling happy and connected to the life you live is normal. Yeah. For sure, there's interruptions to that. I promise you, I don't feel happy and connected 24/7. Definitely not. But those interruptions, in my opinion, don't have to be prolonged. And especially not if they're undesired. We can actually have that happiness and connection, providing it's what we truly want and providing we're willing to proactively seek that for ourselves. States of ongoing anxiety and panic and frustration and overwhelm and depression, self-doubt, shame, they're not normal. Yes, they're common. Yeah. But they do not have to be your state of being. And we choose every day, whether you're aware of it now or not. And I wasn't back then. I was choosing every day. Am I going to continue affirming the reality that I'm living? Or am I going to start redesigning that a little bit, reshaping that a little bit? Because and it's not easy. It is definitely not easy, but it's possible for all of us. So that was my journey.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that I want to circle back to that you mentioned. And I think, when people are diagnosed with something like chronic kidney disease, and that's, it can come from they've had diabetes, or they've got polycystic kidney disease, or they've had IgA nephropathy. There's a whole pile of things, or heart disease, whatever it is that's led to that. So often kidney disease, and especially end stage, for the majority of people, is generally the end of a long time of being unwell, because it's generally it's something that happens secondary. Every now and then it's an acute thing that happens to people. So that whole thing you spoke about people making their reality of being unwell, having symptoms, and everything that goes with that. So high blood pressure and diabetes may not cause long-term anxiety, depression. Kidney disease and being told potentially your life is going to end in dialysis or a kidney transplant, or you'll die, will definitely cause all of those sort of things. So I'd love you just to zone in on that reality of how, and it's the slight shift where we go from, okay, we've got a diagnosis and we're sick, into now I'm experiencing symptoms and I don't want to feel that way. And so you've got this almost period in the beginning where you're doing what you can to get well, and then if that doesn't work, you move into, this is just my life now, I'm used to aches and pains and feeling fatigue, to then your day-to-day function and how you view the world becomes whatever it is that you create in your mind. And I think that can be very hard for people to dig and reverse themselves back out of what they've created in their new reality, especially if you're off in the hospital having dialysis 3 times a week. So I'd love you to, and maybe I'm jumping ahead there, but maybe unpack what that looks like, or what some practical steps and tools people can do to just, number one, become aware that they're living in a reality that is so far from what we call maybe vital, and living down here, what things that they can do to bring themselves back up, even if they're small things, to help take their shift or their focus away from feeling like and believing like this is the only reality that they can have.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of where the pain and stress can actually come from is the most pure intentions of not wanting to unpack and not wanting to get stuck in feeling those shitty times, right? Which is so ironic, because it's so important, and it's an interesting way to answer your question, but it's so important to actually feel what you're going through and not dismiss it and not suppress it. And of course, we don't want to get stuck there and live there and unpack there either. But sometimes the toe dipping or the running away from it, instead of just being real with what's happening and then leveraging from that, that can be what is actually amplifying the pain or the anxiety or the frustration or the overwhelm, or the hopelessness as well, because we're not allowing ourselves to live and access our reality. So it's not possible for us to use our curious and creative and open and expansive and flexible mindset, because we haven't yet become real with the facts of what's actually going on. We might be able to acknowledge it with the language of a diagnosis or a label, but if we're not allowing ourselves to go there and feel that and trust that we can hold that for ourselves and just be with it, then we're not really in either place. And we feel caught, we feel stuck, we feel hopeless. It's really hard to know where to go from there. So I think one of the first things is acknowledging, full body acknowledgement of where we're at. Yeah, even if that feels scary, or even if that feels fearful, because then you've got the platform or the landing to build upon as well.
So when you say full body acknowledgement, work people through that. They'll be like, what does that mean? What's that from acknowledgement to full body? What does a full body acknowledgement mean?
Full body acknowledgement, some examples of what that could look like is the ability to sit with yourself and just be. And in that process, you'll be able to feel, you know, am I holding tension or tightness somewhere? So often it will be in our chest, and our breath is a great way to check. So, you know, how deeply am I breathing, or how shallow is my breath? How do I feel in my gut? Like, am I feeling nauseous? Am I feeling nervous? Am I feeling panicked? Like tightness of our muscles can be another one. Like, where are our shoulders sitting? Yeah. When we worked in a clinic together, there were lots of chiropractors around that would always come push my shoulders down. So they can be some great ways. Also sitting and having conversations with yourself around, you know, if I was to remove any judgment about what this actually means about my value as a person or who I am as a person, what are the thoughts that I'm having? If I'm experiencing an emotion of anxiety or of panic or of sadness or anger, what's the thought that is happening in accompaniment with that? Yeah, like get interested and get curious about that. But it's essentially arriving to this place where you're okay with who you are, regardless of what shape or form that takes. And it doesn't mean you're staying there. You might choose to, and you're entitled to. Yeah, we're all entitled to our experience. What we choose to do with that information, that's something else. First of all, let's just remember you're entitled to your experience and you can have it, but you're the only one that can give yourself permission to actually do that. So it's that willingness to say, and actually the wheelchair example was really good for me. I felt really embarrassed. I felt like I wanted to hide. I felt shame. I felt like I did not feel good in myself because I didn't have, you know, the lifestyle and those achievements propping me up for my worth anymore. And I had to decide, you know, I'm still an incredible person. I'm still brilliant. I'm still capable. I'm still intelligent. I'm still beautiful. And I'm still entitled to my experience. And if we can come from that place, that's when you can begin advocating for what you need as well.
I think that's such a good point, because I think there's so much resistance to illness and being unwell. And in that resistance is a denial of who we are and ourselves. And so as we slide down, in the example of kidney disease, slide down a potential health scale, there's this resistance more and more to resisting what is. And from that place, obviously, as you mentioned, it's very hard to advocate and change when you're in resistance to the reality that you have. And it was one of the tough things that I went through too, having to accept the reality that I had multiple sclerosis. And once I was able to do that, then you advocate from a different place, from a place of empowerment, rather than denying a part of who you are and your experience. So I think that's a really good point to bring that up. It's the acceptance of what is, and then going from there. There's something else you said in that I think is really important to circle back to, and that is the loss of sense of self-worth. And I think for anyone with chronic disease and illness, that feeling like you've got a purpose and how you contribute to the world when you're in a diseased state, it's often to people feel like they're a burden on society, a burden on the world, a burden on their partners and friends and family, and that they're no longer contributing. So they lose that sense of, why am I here and what's my purpose, which is something that you managed to connect to. I'd love you just to talk through that for people, because I'm sure most of the people with serious end stage kidney disease, and maybe even those further up, would identify with that feeling like they don't contribute, or they're a burden on people, or what's their purpose, or what does that look like? So how did you reconnect that spark for you, and what was the process that you took yourself through to reclaim that sense of self-worth and belief that you have purpose and stuff to bring to the world?
Yeah. Purpose is such, such a cool conversation topic I could talk about for ages. And it's come up a lot in my personal circles recently as a conversation topic. And the way that we've spoken about it and how I would begin is connecting to what feels worthwhile. Yeah, because when we feel like we don't know why we're here to exist, or when we feel like we're a burden, it's safe to say that we haven't got access to what would feel worthwhile. So if we can begin to tap into that, so that not only does it build up our self-worth as well, but it also gives purpose to moving through the pain. Because if we don't know why it would be worthwhile to challenge our thoughts, or to sit in painful emotions, or to accept our current reality, of course, like, it doesn't make sense that we would do any of that. Yeah. So if we can connect to something that feels worthwhile, that makes it far more rewarding. Now, typically what I see, and what was true for me too, is that we've got this warped idea of what purpose is. We think that it's a label. We think that it's an output. Yeah. And that it's specific to one thing in a certain time of life. And that if that one thing was taken away, we would no longer have it anymore. And one of the most common ways I see that is career. So like a title or a label in career. Financial status, material items is another big one. But if we pare that back and we look at, okay, like what was actually important in that example to me, then we can begin to come up with some different words that describe what purpose is for us, that are then flexible, and they can be like picked up and put in different areas of life. So there's a few steps I'm moving through on this, but I'll give you an example for me.
Yeah.
So in this current space in my life, those words for me that bring purpose to my life are joy, shared experiences, and exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of like which area of my life I'm showing up in, I can access those. So I can access those in my business 100%, but I can also access those in the foods that I choose to fuel my body with. I can access those in the relationships I choose to connect with. I can access those in the content like I'm reading or watching on my screens. So all of a sudden, that access to purpose is far more at your fingertips. And how I personally did this when I was recovering, I can remember so clearly this day where I was well enough to be out in the wheelchair and Dad was pushing me, and it was China. So to just leave the house was crossing 8 lanes of traffic. And it just like, I remember looking down and just seeing the bitumen like going past. And I was like, I can't even cross the road. Like, how am I going to do these 10K runs, or my yoga teacher training, or hike New Zealand? Like, how am I going to do any of these things that feel purposeful for me, that feel worthwhile, or like they have meaning, when I can't even walk across 8 lanes of traffic? And one of my mantras and favorite quotes has become, little by little, a little becomes a lot. And it's a Tanzanian proverb. And what I came to realize was it is so important to know like your current end goal. Yeah. So for me, some examples would have been what I just shared, the yoga teacher training, or the 10K run, or the hiking, or studying. I thought I wanted to study naturopathy back then. But then also looking at, okay, how can we break that down into like mini steps, like little by little? And examples of that for me was like, okay, I can practice standing and waiting for the lift to come so that I can build strength. And then down the track, I'll be able to take the lift down. What were some other examples? I remember like I knew that I would need to build strength in my body. So I started with just like 5 calf raises, just like standing, holding onto the bench. So like getting so creative and so curious about what that actual starting point can be, and knowing what the end goal is, but actually letting go of that a little bit, because with this little by little, if you're not willing to give yourself access to those little by little bits, I promise you, you will never have a lot. And that's true for all areas of life. So there has to be this willingness to be the student, to be the learner, to be like the worst at doing something, maybe to begin with, and to hold that space for ourselves. So I can barely even remember what the question was, Fee, but I've gone off on a big tangent.
It was, how do we, people feeling like they've lost that sense of purpose and how they can
back. So I think it's the connection, right? How can you connect what you're doing in each and every day to the bigger purpose as well? And some people need to bring more focus towards routine or structure. Other people, if you're like me, need to find a little bit more freedom in that sometimes. And that's where joy will come too, is like, it doesn't have to look the same or be so rigid all the time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I like that. Just finding purpose in the mundane is almost what you're saying, because you're right. We've got this preconceived notion that purpose is my life career, or how am I going to influence the world, but it might be just being listening to your partner, or and like really listening and connecting, or being the best grandparent that you can be. And that might mean the same thing, just being able to show up and rather than thinking about maybe going to have dialysis or the foods that you can't eat, or just being able to be there and connect, and in that moment that's your purpose there. So it's what I heard you say, it's a bit more living in the moment and being mindful of letting go of maybe the big picture to be able to connect to the smaller picture and take those more practical steps that build upon each other, right?
Yeah.
I also wanted to come back to the point that you talked about being your own advocate, which is something that at Kidney Coach with the Kidney Disease Solution is actually the major driver. So when we sat down and did all the core values of the business, education to empower people to be able to make their own decisions was such a big thing. And of course, people with kidney disease are exactly what happened to my nana. She went in and she was told, well, it's incurable. It's this is what's going to happen to you. You've got stage 2 or 3 at the moment, but you'll end up on stage. You'll end up at stage 5. You'll eventually need dialysis, potentially a kidney transplant. If you're old, so maybe you won't get on the list. So, that whole people give their power away to other people, and I see this a lot in kidney disease, because if you get on Google, you're going to find it's incurable. Nothing, medicine doesn't work. They should stay away from all herbs, take all potassium out of their diet. Like, it's really rigid and structured. And so we find a lot of people, and the feedback we get is they've given up hope, and then they find the program and they get their hope back. And if that's all we do for people, that's so amazing. But walk me through how, because this is something I really want our community to get, is how you self-advocate and take that power back, so you can let go of the labels and the beliefs and the conditions that maybe someone else has put on you, because then people live within that. And how do you create freedom away from those labels and to be able to take your power back around having chronic disease?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it begins with self-awareness and acknowledgement first, of like, what are those labels, or what are those limiting beliefs that you're carrying around, and that you're desiring to change. Most of what I find is that people are pretty good at tracing back. Oh, it was that doctor that said that, or it was when my mum did this, or when my dad, implied that. So we're pretty good at tracing back. What we struggle with is letting that go.
Yes.
And cutting the cord of what that has meant up until now. And we struggle for 2 reasons. One is because we're not taught, so we might be using the best skills that we have available to us at this point in time. But the other is, it is really, and I don't know if I can swear on here, so I'm going to say freaking hard, to take responsibility for your own life. It is very, very challenging. It's confronting. It can be painful. It can be frustrating. It can make you very angry. How I describe myself in this state is foul. But on the other side of that is liberation and reward. And I nearly swore again, but like very, very dense, a very high quality, dense level of inner peace. It's insane what happens when we use our voice and when we take responsibility and we hold power for the experience we're having in life. Now, whilst we aren't responsible for everything that has happened outside of ourselves or toward us, what we are responsible for is the meaning that we give that and the meaning that we continue to live out. And that is going to have a direct impact on our happiness and our health and our well-being. And one of the ways that I explain how this happens is that it's like we're carrying around all of these things that have been offered towards us. And I often use the analogy of like, this is what's happened. Yeah, someone said something, they've implied something, or maybe you've observed their behavior and it's been posed as a suggestion towards us. And it's like offered on a platter like this. Yeah. And it only becomes a problem for us when we say, oh, yes, thank you. That's for me. Yeah. And then we take it on board, we activate it, and it becomes part of our being and who we are and how we show up in the world. Now, this can happen within our conscious awareness, but so frequently it also happens outside of our conscious awareness, so at a subconscious level, particularly if we have a relationship or rapport with someone. So if they're the people that have brought us into this world and they've raised us and cared for us and loved for us and they're doing the best that they can, if there's someone who is a qualified expert and we're desiring direction or we're desiring help, that can pass through our conscious level of awareness more easily. Yeah, so subconsciously. So this isn't about blame and it's not about excuses, but it is about looking at, okay, what am I taking on here and what is true for me and what can I see now as an adult because I've lived out enough cycles or patterns of this belief or of this programming that it's evident to me, and I've tried to change it, it's evident to me that it's not as simple as saying, oh, I got that from over there. So it's then about looking at, well, what do I want to do about that? Like, what do I want to choose for myself? So in future, when those suggestions come our way, we can say, oh, thank you, but no thank you. Just like you're being offered food that you don't like. Yeah.
Yeah. Which people even struggle with that, you know, like just saying no, it's crazy.
Yeah. But if they're on board already, yeah, it's that complete ownership of like, are you or aren't you willing to acknowledge that you've chosen this and you don't have to keep choosing it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful point, because I think
so
that's the thing, isn't it?
it's a huge part of it, for sure. And then a lot of what I talk about too is the curious versus conclusive mindset. So the curious mindset being where we're very creative with our thinking, we're expansive, we're open-minded, we're flexible, we're adaptable, we're willing to be wrong. Yeah, we're happy to acknowledge that we might not have all the information that we need. We're not attached or fixated to things going a certain way. We know that we're the only one in charge of ourselves. We're the only one in charge of our results. And there's no judgment or blame or heaviness or pressure around that. It's just the experience of life. Yeah. And we can see things through the lens of neutral information and get curious about it, interested about it, ask high quality questions like, you know, what was the thought before I had the wave of that emotion? What am I taking this to suggest about myself? Do I feel that this is empowering me, or does it feel unrewarding? Versus more of the conclusive side, which is closed-mindedness or attachment. Yeah, so fixated, believing things have to be a certain way before we can be a certain way, needing things outside of ourselves to change, not being willing to ask the big questions or use our voice or stray from the path. And it's the classic personality trait of someone using a conclusive mindset is, you know, before you've even finished making a proactive suggestion in their direction, they're already telling you why it won't work for them.
Yeah, and it's that happens a lot, and that comes back to people giving their power away, and a little bit of collective conditioning, I think, in that we're taught that other people know our bodies better than we know it. And when you get desperate into a serious diagnosis, that if you give your power away, then you hand also your healing off to someone else. So we don't have to be self-responsible or part of that. Someone else heals us rather than us healing ourselves. And I think that's such a fundamental difference, because at the end of the day, you know this because you work the same way as it's even with patients when they're like, oh, it's amazing, Fiona, thank you for treating me, I'm so much better. I'm like, I didn't do anything. You're the one that changed the diet, took the food, took the tablets, whatever it was that you were doing. I did none of that. And I just think we have a collective consciousness where we expect other people to heal us. And like you mentioned, that it's confronting and scary to have to take self-responsibility. And I think that is such a big hurdle for most people, because most people aren't taught how to do it. And we're taught, especially in health, that you don't need to do that. You hand your power off to someone else and they'll take care of it. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, and almost to an extent, like, how dare you question somebody in that role that's giving you information or feedback or an opinion as well.
Absolutely. And especially, friends and family, if someone comes along and says, look, I want to have a go at doing my kidney disease naturally, if they've jumped on Google and looked, it's incurable, and they're like, well, what are you doing? You're just going to potentially take things that may damage your kidneys more. And there's so much fear around that, and people stay in that contracted fear state of not wanting to change or rock the boat. But I'm a big believer, if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep getting what you've always got.
Exactly, right.
There's something there I wanted to go back to that you've mentioned a few times now, and that is wanting the outside to create your reality, like searching outside of yourself, which is a little bit what we're talking about here, about handing our power off. What are some of the tools, and maybe you've come through some of them, but how do people, what tips would you give people out there of going, where they can go, oh, I recognize that I've given my power away to my nephrologist or my GP, and it has felt incongruent, but I always taught that they know better. I've started to read some stuff now that maybe goes against the grain and that feels right. What tips do you give people to help them reclaim their power, or even just have a conversation with a healthcare professional, or challenge or buck the trends of the norm? What tips or advice would you give people to be able to navigate that space? Because that can be really quite scary and new for people.
Yeah. So there's two main ones that jump out at me that I can speak to on this. And the first is, I love this question, right? Because it jumps straight to action, which is really important. If we're not willing to take proactive action, like you said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It would be ludicrous to think that we could do the same things over and over again and get something different. One of the most vital steps that I see missed for sustainable, like long-lasting change is that with the best of intentions, we jump in and we just try and stop doing something and start doing something else. And it's not the worst first technique, because in some instances that might work. But if this is something that's been, and self-worth and handing over our power generally is, if this is something that's been going on for a while and it's a well-ingrained pattern and we know we're very good at doing it, there's going to be some reasons why we've continued to do that. So exploring, this is painful. It's painful that I'm handing over my healing to someone else. It's painful that I'm feeling incongruent and I'm not speaking up. And then, I critique myself and I cringe at myself. That's painful. It's painful that this way of healing feels so congruent to me and the people around me don't seem to be able to accept that. So there's no negating that it's painful. But when we continue to respond to the desires of the outside world instead of the desires that are internal to us, there's always a good reason we're doing that. So taking some time to reflect on, what is it? Like, how is it serving us? How are we gaining from continuing to act against what feels good for us or true for us on the inside? How is it not a problem to be staying silent? How is it not a problem to be letting the family members, speak over what's true for me when I'm the only person connected to my body and I'm entitled to my experience? Because what that will enable you to do is you'll gain information, and until you find a new way of becoming okay with that, becoming ready to let go of that, acknowledging or at least having awareness to that's being part of shifting this pattern, it'll just feel like you're getting like punches to the face in every direction. Yeah. Because you'll be aligning with what's true for you, but it will maybe not be landing well, or it won't be feeling good, or you'll be up against really strong resistance from yourself because there's still good reasons as to why you wouldn't do that. So that can be very, very helpful. And what is also linked into that is understanding what need you have, like what core human need do you have? Tony Robbins talks about this a lot, the 6 core human needs that those behaviors are tracing back to. Because when we just stop a behavior and we take it out, that need is then not being met. Yeah. So we're denying ourselves in a new way. Whereas if we can first identify, how am I gaining from doing things the way that I'm doing it right now? What needs is that meeting? And then bring on board a new way of meeting that need, because our subconscious mind loves to follow instructions. It also loves to protect us and care for us. So if we remove a behavior, so for example, I talk quite a bit about emotional eating. If we're like, don't eat those foods, but that has been providing certainty for us, or it's been providing a feeling of love and connection for us, and we haven't found a new way to service that need of certainty or love and connection yet that feels more rewarding, of course the old pattern, that's all your body, your soul, your intuition, your subconscious knows to play out. So it's going to go back there to service that need for you, as like all of our behaviors are derived from our needs. So those 2 things are really important. Understanding, like, what's the good reason that this painful experience or this painful behavioral pattern is here? What need is it meeting? And then once you've identified the need, that also empowers you to start having conversations. Yeah. Because which may be the same as the pain point, or it may be looking at your needs from a new angle of what is it within me that which need is being met in me wanting to speak up, or in me wanting to try this natural or different approach, or in me wanting to be more actively engaged in asking questions or asking for more information in my self-education and my recovery or my healing process. Because when you can identify what the needs are, our communication tends to open up with vulnerability and information versus criticism and language focused on what we don't want to have happen. So an example of that quickly would be, rather than saying, I don't like it when you speak over the top of me and shut down my ideas of what feels true for me and I want to experience, we could say, something that I've been reflecting on and thinking about is that I'm really connected to my body and I want to trust that a little bit more. And here's how I want to do that. And what I need from you actually at this time is just love and support. That is the most beneficial thing you could provide in my direction right now. So it just sets you up for 2 completely different conversations.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, what else did I want to circle back to? I think we've spoken about lots of that stuff. This is where I wanted to come back to, actually. And this is the big thing. And I know this is very much the work that I grew up in the PD land and my own journey. And I would love to get your take on this. And that's the finding the gratitude and the purpose in the condition and the health condition. So obviously you've springboarded, your experience is now very heavily incorporated into how you work with people. So it's not that going through chronic fatigue, as awful as it was a waste of time or detrimental to your journey. If anything, you tell me if I'm wrong, it's like you can reflect and build on it because it's giving you all these life tools. And I think that's something that I want to talk to for people with kidney disease, is that sometimes, I'm a big believer that the human body's an amazing thing at healing itself when we do the right things. But I also believe that sometimes we have to go through things. That's part of our reason for learning. Now, that doesn't mean we have to stay in a chronic disease. I see chronic disease as an opportunity for growth and change, and for you to do things differently, because it's a set of behaviors, actions, being the way you eat, don't eat, the way that you move or don't move, or think, not think, breathe, whatever that is that's led you to here. And so you've got an opportunity for change and all of those sort of things. So yeah, talk us through how you did that and how that was for you and what that process was of being able to see that maybe the disease in itself, it's like the obstacle is the way, the Ryan Holiday thing. It's like the disease wasn't the pinnacle of the worst of my life. Maybe it was a turning point for me to become more aligned with who I need to be. And so I'd love people with chronic kidney disease to maybe see their disease as an opportunity rather than something that has to be defeated and brought down. It's like, what opportunity is this giving you? So what are some of the tools that you used and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, totally. And you're spot on. I feel like, if not, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it triggered and prompted me to ask such better questions of myself and of my life. I would not have healed. I wouldn't have been able to create healing without building a beautiful relationship with myself, connecting with myself, starting to trust myself, honor myself. I had to use my voice. That is how I started getting well. Yeah. For sure, you know, so many of the treatment components, which were a huge part of my recovery, like enormous, were absolutely vital too. But here's the thing, and one of my practitioners, great practitioners, said to me was, stress trumps everything. So if we're forcing it, if we're manipulating ourselves, if we're bullying ourselves, if we're treating ourselves like the naughty child that can't be trusted, if we're rigid, if everything's black and white, it's actually not going to matter what we're doing, because the stress is going to trump all of it. And that was a big gift in it for me, because not speaking up was so freaking stressful. Like, it was so stimulating of my nervous system that it was working against all of these beautiful things that I was doing to heal and to support my body and to encourage my body. So gosh, like, it was so hard to begin with. And now it is something that, and like, I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say this, but it's something I do with such ease that I almost struggle to find people that I can connect with on that same level. Obviously, I do it as a profession now as well. But I'm like, you know, my relationships, I'm like, just tell me what you want and then you can have it, you know. But that's so hard for some people. And it was so hard for me to begin with as well. So it was really around learning boundaries, knowing, you know, first of all, tapping into myself and even knowing, what do I want to say no to? What do I want to say yes to? And then, of course, there's like fear in that, because there's risk in trying new things, right? So then being willing, and I mentioned before, exposure is now one of like the ways I feel purpose. Yeah? If I'm not exposing myself and feeling risks, I don't feel like life is worth living. So I don't know, I feel like it's helpful to share like that, where I came from to where I am now, because to begin with, it would literally, like, I would have to force the words out of my mouth. I would have to like pre-plan the first sentence I was going to say. And like, I would almost feel like I was going to vomit. I was so anxious and like stressed and uncomfortable with expressing my truth. But the more that I did that, the more liberated I became, and the more rewards came into my life, and not just things that I was working towards and then steadily appeared, you know, like whether it's a business or a relationship, but like that feeling of things just starting to like work in harmony around me, just fall into place, almost fall into my lap. Because, you know, you talked before about the obscure truths that I love to share, and I've shared some of them on here. So I'm the only one in charge of me. I'm the only one in charge of my results. I'm entitled to my experience. No one knows what is most right for me other than myself. I'm the only one connected to my body. And another one that I teach is the universe is always watching for our opening. So whatever it is that you believe in, whether it's a God, whether it's an energy, a higher being, something bigger than yourself, it's always watching. So if you're just taking those micro steps forward, you get to play with that. And it's really, really fun. And there's no better place to feel such a contrast and such a result in standing in your truth and speaking up and using boundaries and saying no when you want to, and yes when you really want to but you feel a little bit scared to, than when you're experiencing a chronic disease and you get some relief and some joy in some certain pockets of your life around that.
So do you think that when you started to do that and speak your truth more in those small moments, were you then connected to the joy and gratitude early on? So then you could suddenly see the purpose of the disease and then it start to experience gratitude from there? Or did it take a long time from building a sort of a distance from being so sick to be able to look back and go, oh, it wasn't so bad? Because when you're in the middle of it, it can still feel like that. Or did you find that just starting to dig yourself out of the hole and putting those things and boundaries in place, that there was joy in that process, and therefore it was like a snowball effect, because it's suddenly you let go of the, and I'm just talking, this is almost how it sounds like, you suddenly saw a different way to build your life, and so you start incrementing those sort of things and your energy is going into that, so you let go of the diagnosis in a sense, because now your focus is on building. And that gets this slight spark of excitement and joy as you can start to see the changes and just experience a different way of expressing your beingness. So was the gratitude, or maybe the gratitude is the wrong word, but was the aha, the realization that this disease doesn't have me anymore and I'm going to be okay sort of down here? Or did that come much further up in the healing line where you had some distance and you could look back at it?
Yeah. Great question. It was probably neither. Like, it wasn't immediate.
Yeah.
It definitely wasn't further down the line either. Like, I can tell you, I was like in the depths of dis-ease and illness, and feeling really happy, because I believe, like, it was the direction of my belief and what I knew was possible for me, and my connection to self. Yeah.
Right.
And it was quite baffling to people around me. Yeah, that you know, I think they would have felt more comfortable if I was struggling a little bit more in some of those stages, because they couldn't connect with that experience of like, you know, life's tough right now, but like, and I say this with so many caveats, like, but I was thriving in the struggle. And when I say thriving in the struggle, I don't mean thriving like the peak of thriving. I mean, in the set of conditions I was in, what's available in terms of an experience of thriving I was having. So there was still like hard times, hard moments, whatnot, but I was just so connected to the direction of where I was going, what I thought about myself, what I wanted in my life, that it was just building and it was snowballing. And yeah.
I think that's important for people listening. And I think this is a big thing, because I know this is definitely I've got exactly the same experience with having MS, and it's that I thrive got a great life, even though some people would look in and go, you know, I know my parents are just like, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, my life is good, you know, like I'm not stressed about stuff. And it's been in the letting go of life having to look a certain way and being able to find gratitude and joy in the present moment that I think enables the healing. And so that's definitely something I wanted to reiterate to people. It's like, don't think that when I get well, then I can be grateful for the experience. It's about finding, you know, it sounds to me for you, Gemma, that it's that connection to yourself and the expression of who you really are is almost your purpose in a sense. It's like embodying all of that. And when you made your mind up that chronic fatigue wasn't Gemma, that this was Gemma, and you took your attention off that and started to put your attention on building the person that you wanted to become, you started to thrive within that container. And I think my point is, to people with something like kidney disease, you have the same opportunity to say, okay, I've been diagnosed with kidney disease, but I get emails all the time of people in their 80s, like their blood pressure's gone down, their blood sugar's normal, and they're back out exercising, and they're recreating the person that they are, and they're deciding that they're not going to be 80 with kidney disease, that they're going to go back and have this new life. And they're the people that we see get really well. So I love that you brought that up, because it's like you managed to find within what looks like a crappy way of living a sense of purpose and joy, because you saw a way to recreate yourself or rebuild again. And I think that's an opportunity that we all have, whether you've got a chronic disease or not, that we have every day. But sometimes it's not until our back is against the wall and we've got no other opportunities that we actually make the changes that we need to, which is unfortunate. And that's what I feel like disease is. It's, you've got no other choice. And some people
100%.
let it get really bad.
Yeah. I could have done it way earlier, but I honestly believe it had to get that bad for me. And it just did. And one of the other things I would add, Fee, that just as you were speaking then and talking about that, that I haven't talked about, is that modeling was a huge part of what I did as well. So, whatever I did talk before about, like, we've got a choice in terms of the content that we're consuming, be really mindful about that. And we can find evidence to support anything that we want to. So if you truly do want this experience where you're thriving whilst moving through a really challenging and hard time, look for people that are ahead of you. They've already accomplished that. They've already achieved that. One of the big ones for me throughout my recovery was Turia Pitt.
Yes, amazing.
So it's just looking for examples of that and then choosing for those to be your reference points. And it makes an enormous difference. And I think it's important to do so as well with people that you don't have a personal relationship with. But the internet and social media is brilliant for that now. You can totally analyze, and so many people are sharing now, like, how is it that they got to where they are? Like, Turia has books, and you can get on her email list and she speaks, and so it's so accessible. TED Talks, when I was at my worst housebound, that's how I started every single day. I would set my state with a TED Talk. So
fantastic. And just for those in the US that don't know who Turia Pitt is, she's an amazing woman. She was running a marathon and there was a huge fire, and they had moved most of the marathon runners around the fire, and Turia was caught in between where the fires were, and she wasn't told to move, and she's got third degree burn, severe to 80% of her body. She shouldn't have lived.
She had to learn to walk again, eat again, everything.
A lot, so much plastic surgery and skin grafting. And I mean, you look at her and she's been through this. And what I love is that she married the man of her dreams. He stayed with her, and she's just this amazing woman. And third degree burns. There you go. Third degree burns are meant to be some of the most painful ongoing scars, and she's just got such an amazing outlook of life and giving back to the community, and she's found real purpose in what she's been through. So she's been able to reframe, rather than being a victim, she's been able to reframe all of that and really add a lot of purpose to the world. So Turia, spelled Turia and then Pitt, is that right? If you want to look her up. Well, I think that's amazing, Gemma. You've given us so many gems in there. Is there anything that you wanted to add or reiterate or say to the kidney disease solution, or the kidney coach community out there, that you think is a real takeaway and that they need to hear again?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that last bit around modeling was really important. It just really hit home that was one of the other key things that I really did throughout that process. But I think a lot of what I've shared is very thorough, and it's the gems. So it really is that little by little, a little becomes a lot. We can embody that and live that in so many different ways. It doesn't, we don't have to be 10 out of 10 every single day, and we will not ever be 10 out of 10 in every single area of our life. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. So yeah, I think that quote is a really beautiful one to bring on board, and, you know, put it up visually or have it as a screensaver of your phone. And it's a great way to start that self-permission piece.
Yeah, and I love that. Now, if people wanted to get in touch with you because they think, oh yes, Gemma's made some really good points here, and I maybe need someone that's can keep me accountable to my thoughts and how I'm creating my reality, how would people contact you?
So through my website is best, which is Gemma Hanley, so GEMMAHANLEY.com. And there's an inquiry page there, work with me, and you can send me an inquiry through there.
Perfect. I'll add that in the show notes at the bottom. Gemma, it's been amazing to have you on. Thank you for sharing your journey with us and some great tools that hopefully those of you listening in our Kidney Coach community will take on board. And I think what I really want to say is that dis-ease is an opportunity to heal not just your body, but so many things in your life. If you're willing, like Gemma said, to be truly authentic, sit down and have a look at that. And that is hard. It's hard to take that self-accountability and self-responsibility. But I think Gemma and I can both vouch to the fact that if you get brave enough to do it, it'll be the most rewarding, best thing that you ever do in your life. And then you will be defined for something greater than an illness. You'll be defined for who you come out the other end of that. And even if that doesn't mean you cure a disease, you've redefined who you are, and you can let go of the pain and suffering that has maybe come with the diagnosis. So if you've liked what you've heard, remember to hit subscribe below. We have a whole pile of other great videos in here as well, and we're always pumping out great new content. If there's anything particularly you want to hear, make sure you drop in a comment below so we know what videos we can make for you in the future. You can also hit us up on our Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/kidneycoach, or head to our website, kidneycoach.com. There are some amazing articles on there. And of course, that gives you access to our Alkagenesis supplements if you need some support with your kidneys. So huge love to everybody out there. Hopefully you found this valuable. Gemma, again, thank you very much. We'll dump Gemma's details. Not dump, I will type lightly and nicely Gemma's details in the show notes below if you wanted to reach out and contact her. And yeah, until next time, thank you very much, and we'll see you then. Bye, guys.